I'm Sabina Vaught, Director of the Kinloch Commons for Critical Pedagogy and Leadership at the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome to the Digital Freedom Leadership Project. This project consists of a series of brief conversations with leaders reflecting on one of their guiding principles. The project is designed as a resource to support educational leaders doing freedom work everywhere. Joining me today for a conversation about one of his leadership principles is Dr. Emile Pitre. Emile is Senior Advisor to the Vice President of the University of Washington. As a graduate student at the University of Washington, Dr. Pitre was a founding member of the school's Black Student Union. He served as Director of the Office of Minority Affairs Instructional Center for 13 years, which is where I met him when I was 19 years old, and was promoted to Associate Vice President for Minority Affairs in 2004. He retired from the university in 2014 and returned 6 months later as Senior Advisor. In 2020, Dr. Pitre received the University of Washington's Charles E. Odegaard Award, the highest achievement in diversity at the University of Washington. His forthcoming book, Revolution to Evolution, the story of the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity at the University of Washington, can be found at the University of Washington Press and booksellers everywhere. Emile, thank you for joining me in conversation as part of the Digital Freedom Leadership Project.
It is my pleasure, Sabina. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored.
Likewise, and I'm excited to learn from your reflections today. So I'll jump in and start with the first of the two questions, and that is, what is one of your leadership principles that you'd like people viewing and listening to be able to reflect on? And where did it come from? Who did you learn it from? What's sort of the origin story of that principle, and why that particular principle?
Yes, the overarching principle for me is commitment. And it has its origins as far back as when I was a student activist in the Black Power movement at the University of Washington. And it probably goes back even farther. Service has always been a part of my DNA, if you will. And I think it was inherited from my mother, who would always want to help people. And when I was an undergraduate, people drafted me to be their tutor, to be their mentor, peer mentor. And so service was a commitment. In my fraternity, we have a slogan that says, service is a lifestyle. So that fit me exactly. And so I consider myself a servant leader. And pretty much all the leadership positions that I've held, I've been drafted, I've been nominated. I did not apply for any of those positions. And I think it had a lot to do with me, my service ethics and the commitment. It was during the movement, we were first and foremost committed to the communities, and the communities of oppressed and exploited people, which went really beyond just Black people. It included American Indians, Chicano Latinos, and even people in Latin America and Asia, because we understood, and it was through the many studies that we did. We read, I have a book list of 30. So we looked at how things were unfolding based on America's overwhelming big fist, if you will. So we were always committed to community first. And then as I moved into serving as an instructor, chemistry instructor at the instruction center and director, the focus was still about community, but it was about the communities from whence our students came, the students that we served. And the main focus for me and that commitment is for students, to help students successfully navigate the challenging and vigorous curriculum at the University of Washington. And we knew, based on our demand to admit students, not only those who were regularly admitted or met the requirements, we insisted that the university had an alternative admission system so that we could change the representation of the demographics of the University of Washington, really to change the face of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Washington. So we demanded that that take place, but we also realized if we did not come through, that it would be a failure. They would absorb the program or discontinue it altogether. So the focus was to make sure that we had in place a system that would prepare students to be successful, not only to earn a passing grade, but to also prepare them for graduate and professional schools, and to also take positions in the workforce, and at including the STEM workforce, and healthcare, pre-med, pre-dent, pre-pharmacy. So that was our goal. And I like to think that since we were doing God's work, people like you and others gravitated to the instruction center. Sometimes I like to feel like I had something to do with it, because I was always like to be around highly intelligent people. And luckily for me, coming from a sharecropper's background, working in the fields until I graduated, I got the opportunity to be in honors programs with very bright people. And I like to say that I like to be around nerds. And I say that I am a nerd as well, but I'm a cool nerd. And there's the former president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He really celebrates people being nerds, because that's the cool thing to be. So luckily for us, we had staff. We attracted staff who were committed themselves to working with these students. We have staff that stayed 35, 40 years working, being underpaid, but their commitment and my commitment to them was to make sure that I represented them at all levels, and that I took the heat for anything that went wrong, and I also was committed to being a strong advocate for them and for the students and for the program that I spent I have spent more than 40 years in, and it's all driven by that commitment to be successful and to choose a program that was my choice because of the gratification I received from our students, the population that we serve, underrepresented minorities, and economically and education disadvantaged students, to help them be successful against sometimes overwhelming odds, was the highest achievement for me that I could realize. And so, and during the process, we attracted instructors and tutors who were of that same ilk. And so it really worked out. But it was all for me, it was all about commitment. Commitment to also the use of data to make informed decision making or to make improvements. And the one thing I realized early on is if we could not prove that we were effective at what we were doing, that would be the end of us. So when you were there, we had a really sort of arcane system, but then we moved to a barcode system where we could track students by courses, also by and look at their grades and how many times they use the services, and then do studies to see if we could prove statistically that it made a difference. We knew we were very popular, but the naysayers would always say, well, okay, you're popular, but are you making a difference? Are you really making a difference? So I moved to that level. And to demonstrate my commitment, I never took a course in statistics. In one of my analytical chemistry courses, we look at statistics in terms of looking at quality when you're doing analysis of the ingredients of a substance. But that was the only time I had it. But I've always had a intuitive sense for statistics and how best to use it. And it was really, I'm going to sort of jump into what influenced me was I saw that at the University of Washington, when I went to lectures, especially in the quantitative fields, they used statistics to make their case for whatever argument they were presenting or whatever theory. So I was impressed by that overall, and it seemed like the best way to prove our worth. So from there, the one thing that happened to me, at one point I was the associate vice president for what I call academic advancement group. And I had all the different programs, the counseling, the academic counseling, the instructional center, the early identification program, which was graduate and professional school preparation program, include the Upward Bound program, all the different Department of Education program that were from which grants were secured to support the students. And I thought I was doing very well, but they reorganized, and pretty much I got put into assessment only. Went from supervising or having, I think, eight direct reports, and the entire group was over 40 people. But because of my commitment, I wasn't swayed by the reorganization. And the vice president, what I decided was that I could really provide something for her that she didn't even realize she needed. And so I would, based on my reading of different journals, I came up with a way to show that not only were our students doing okay, but when we compared them by ethnicity to the 54 flagship state universities, we found out that we ranked, when it came to graduation rates, we ranked in the top 15. And so not only were we doing okay compared to the university as a whole, which was really not a good comparison because we were looking at two divergent groups. I like to say that we were comparing apples to a fruit basket. So there was no way that would be the best way to prepare. But I came up with ways to show that we were really one of the best programs in America, even we were without a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. But just if we were an institution, we would rank pretty high, just by different ethnic groups. And also when we looked at those who we served at the instructional center, we ranked in the top 19. And it was really top 25 if we looked at the 100 R1 institutions in the country. So we really knew we were doing well, but we used data to make that case. So instead of them taking funds from us, they added more funds. And my commitment too was to really advocate for increasing the budget, to advocate for our staff to receive equitable pay. So all this was based on my commitment toward the program achieving success. Excuse me, and was to achieve success not only for those students, but for their communities. And we went as far as I went as far as if our students who we serve from those communities are successful and we can get them to earn STEM degrees, that we could also narrow the wealth gap, and that's a pretty huge wealth gap. So it was really an overarching approach to achieving success, and it was all for me based on my commitment. So so I was most impressed. When I was in undergraduate school, because one of the things I think that made me really popular among my colleagues was, even though I was serving as director, I was carrying a full load, a load comparable to what they were doing as instructors. I was teaching in the drop-in center. I was conducting academic achievement workshops, which is the fancy name for it is supplemental instruction. We realized early on that the professors are more interested in research than they are in teaching. So we supplemented what they should have been teaching our students. Plus our students came from what I call differentially prepared backgrounds, as opposed to underprepared, because they came from different schools that weren't created equal. But we wanted to make up that difference, and our students have performed quite well with the support that we've provided. But the University of Maryland, Baltimore County had a program called the Meyerhoff Program, run by Freeman Rabowski, who was renowned for having one of the top programs. The difference between us and his program was he had 22,000 nominees and they chose 50. We served everyone who came to us. We weren't selective. In fact, we didn't have that many students in our program that had those academic credentials. But our mantra was, our thrust was to make up that difference. If the students had the potential, as opposed to the academic credentials, and if they had the potential and they followed what we prescribed, and we taught them not only to understand the concepts that they had questions about, but we taught them how to learn. And in some instances, the very capable one teach themselves how to learn, so that they would become lifelong learners, and no matter where they went, they would do well. And another part of my commitment to the program is succession planning. We're not going to be there forever, so we should be grooming those who will come after us to take our places. And we did that even so well that some of our tutors eventually became instructors, highly capable, highly popular. And that's a part of succession planning. And as my advice to the Vice President for Minority Affairs, you need to have succession planning should be a part of the strategy. And so I got the example that I gave about teaching along with the instructors was from the chairman of the chemistry department as I was an undergrad. He was very interested in his students, but he also supported his faculty, and he taught courses alongside them. So, and I found out that my colleagues really respect that you're not there supervising them, but you're there in the trenches with them, working toward making the program successful. So that was setting the example. And in terms of leadership, I read one book 15 years or so ago called From Good to Great by Jim Collins. And it was, he talked about different level leaders. And level 5 leader was really attractive to me. As someone who gave the credit to those who were his direct reports, their direct report, but also was very intent on making sure that we excelled at the highest level, and to really to be able to choose those who would be able to move up in the succession plan, rather than going outside. You choose but he called them getting people on the bus, and once you get them on the bus, you put them in the proper seats later. But the folks who have the potential to be successful. So when a leader left, then there was someone to step in without bringing someone from the outside, training them, and then running the risk of losing them, especially if they were ladder climbers. So that's the example that I followed intuitively and conceptually. When they did a communication test, and they determined that I was a conceptualizer. So it was more like creating concepts in my own mind, and then based on those concepts, executing them. So there were not as much people, but as much approach. And I would say in terms of people, it was the support I got from different people who were at different levels, and they recognized that what I was doing as a leader was beneficial. So they chose me to serve in those roles. And ironically, initially when they were considering me for positions, they were a little leery because they didn't think they could control me. But that's not that's not the best leader to control someone. They were never going to control me, but they figured out that as long as the bottom line was we were being successful. And that's another approach I use. Whatever the bottom line showed, if you were doing well, there's no need to change anything. There's no need to micromanage. But for me, it was all I attributed to my commitment to the people, if you will. And that started as early as 1968.
And as I'm hearing you talk, I'm hearing and recalling, I've known you for 33 years, the ways in which you've maintained that commitment, I think across contexts that maybe are challenging for a lot of people. So I've never observed you lose your commitment to that radicalism of 1968,
Right.
ever. And yet you are able to strategize inside the most sort of neoliberal context or units at the university, and sort of bring those together. I'm hearing for and through this commitment to people.
Yes.
I see that too in you're describing ongoing study, like throughout this, sort of studying texts, but studying social conditions,
Yes.
producing things for people to study, producing data,
Yes.
studying those yourself to, with a team, figure out what needs to happen, give evidence for what is happening. I mean, it's a really
Really.
remarkable, I think, characteristic that you balance these things that for most people are antagonistic, that just
Yeah.
don't synthesize, and you move through them. And I've, over those 33 years, had the opportunity at times to walk with you across campus. And for me, this is the representation of this commitment you're describing. Everyone, you know them by name. They light up when they see you,
Yeah.
and you have conversations about actual specific things, not sort of the weather, but you pay attention to people, and you pay attention to their lives, their concerns, their cares, their goals, and you bring that to the work. And I see that as illustrating all that you've just described in this conversation, is that you are, like, you finish by saying it's a commitment to the people, and it really is evident as you walk across any part of campus or enter any building. I've never had that experience with anyone else. Just a really extraordinary commitment to people and community.
Yes.
And I want to tell that story because I think it illustrates what you're describing here when you're describing radical movement and studying data and running an instructional center. And all of these things kind of come together in the intangible, but so foundational relationships you have with human beings.
Absolutely.
So given that, I'm wondering if you have a story to share for people who are watching or listening that would illustrate just, it's clear this principle of commitment is capacious, it's robust, but is there a story that captures one dimension or one element of it that you think might help people reflect on their own use of commitment in this way in their leadership?
But there's one story that is told in my book by a student who graduated from an alternative high school, which really did not prepare them for college, who had parents who were, into drugs. And so she sort of floundered around trying to find herself. And she found the instructional center. And through her interactions with me and showing her really how to attack problem solving, the strategies, the techniques. And from there, she got really excited about it and did very well in the coursework and decided to be a chemistry tutor herself. And we developed a pretty strong relationship. She even invited me to her wedding. And so 30 years later, she wrote a letter saying that she wasn't sure if I remembered her, but about the impact that I had on her, and that she was an AP chemistry teacher, and that over 2,000 of her students who took her course passed AP with 4s and 5s, passed the AP test in chemistry. And she said that it was because a lot of the students said chemistry was most challenging, but they really enjoyed it because of the technique she had learned at the instruction center on how to make it simple, really. And so she employed that technique and has been a successful chemistry AP teacher for over 30 years. So that's one example that I like to share. And there are a few others who said that they decided to be chemistry teachers because of their interaction with me. I had all types of systems that you could use because for me, some of the concepts at a time were difficult to grasp, or to be able to, when you take a test, to be able to solve problems related to that. And so, because you can only memorize so much, but in other ways you can have what I like to call memory enhancers. I'm calling that now, but I had a special name for the technique. I call them the Pitre technique, and it's based on. I like the sound of that name, and the person who came up with the theory on equilibrium name was Le Chatelier, and they had methods. If you applied stress to a system in equilibrium, it would shift to relieve that stress and achieve a new equilibrium. So which way would it shift was based on how you determine which way it would shift would be your understanding of the system and how it worked. So I created arrows up, arrows down, arrows shift left, shift right. And the technique, whenever that was employed, if you understood what was happening, you would never get a problem wrong. So I named it Le Pitre. And so we also taught a medical college admission test prep course for our students. Because we didn't just stop at undergrad. We were trying to prepare them for all different levels, even including mock interviews based on what we knew about how certain medical school interview committees worked. And so students would ask, do you have a Le Pitre for this particular understanding this system? And I noticed that some of the tutors, they would employ the technique as well. But it worked. It was almost like what they call a law, when it never fails. It wasn't a theory anymore. So, yeah.
And then I hear in that commitment engenders commitment. So it's, your student who's the AP chemistry teacher experienced your commitment, and then she can, your relationship cultivated some of that in her, and she can continue that, and 30 years later recognize that through line of commitment and that sort of intergenerational cultivation of the work, which is long. And you've had that impact on many of us. So we are better for knowing you. I'm really grateful for you and for your
Thank you so much
today.
You do a great job of summarizing what I was trying to say. Very good job.
Well, good.
Very good. Very good.
Well, thank you, Emile. I appreciate the conversation today.
Thank you. I was very pleased to have the opportunity to participate.